Welcome back to another episode of Offbeat Adventures. We're standing here once again on the grade of the former Canadian Northern Railway and later Canadian National Railway's Dorian and then subsequently Kinghorn subdivision. We are in between the communities of Jellicoe, which is to the east, and Beardmore, which is to the west, here in the municipality of Greenstone, Ontario. We're actually just east of a place called Neza, which was a stop on the railway line. And so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be hiking this section right here from this road, which is known as Blackwater Road, named after the Blackwater River, which is just to the south of us. And we're going to be working our way to the west about 3 miles, or just under 3 miles. Right off the hop here, you can actually see a couple of things. So there's a few ties here that are still kicking around now. One of the interesting things about today, and I don't know if you can see this on here, I'll sort of tilt this down a little bit. It's extremely warm. We're in the middle of a mid-August kind of heat spell here, or a heat wave, and it's if you didn't see that on the screen, it says that it's 22. Now, and that's the temperature that I started this hike before 8 a.m. And right now it's 9:37, and it says 22, but feels like 24, and the humidity is 82%. It is just ridiculous. I don't normally do this, but I don't know if you can kind of see me here. I don't normally show myself, but I am just, my tactical vest here is soaked, my shirt is soaked, my glasses are just streaked with sweat. It's just kind of pouring down my head here, so it's quite warm already. It's supposed to get up well over 30 degrees Celsius, and so the reason why we're out here in this kind of brutal conditions is this hike was actually supposed to be part of a two-part hike that I was going to do next year. And so we're going to come back next spring, and we were going to do this section from Blackwater Road all the way down to Beardmore. The only unfortunate part was that they're two very long sections. They're each about 5.8 miles each. So what I decided to do, I was actually in this area right where we're going to end our hike last week, and so I decided to actually break this up into 3 separate hikes for a few reasons. First of all, to shorten those hikes next year, and then the other reason why is that this is not a particularly well-traveled section of grade. This kind of beginning part is, but as we get further to the west, you're going to see that the grade becomes not necessarily the sides, but you're going to see the middle of the grade becomes more and more grown in, and I wanted to kind of show you that what's kind of going on with the grade here. All right, so I'm going to jump up on the bike here, and we're going to get our adventure started. All right, here we go. Okay, so this section here is a little bit more of a quieter section. There's not as much kind of things going on. It's pretty straight. There's basically one curve. You can see, I don't know if you can see on the camera here how straight the grade is here. And there's one curve, and then we're going to enter the start of one of the straightest, longest straight sections on this line. Okay, so while we have a little bit of time, we'll do our usual history lesson. So this line, this railway was built by Canadian Northern Railway between 1911 and 1914. It was going to be one of the last pieces in Canadian Northern's transcontinental ambitions. So the Canadian Northern Railway Company was actually formed in Manitoba in the mid 1890s, and they started by buying up a few small railway lines there. Their first kind of big splash was building a rail line from the city of Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay, to Winnipeg. And that was basically going to provide kind of an alternate route to the Canadian Pacific Railway. Oh, there's a little breeze here, which is nice. And I guess maybe we'll stop here and just kind of explain what's going on. So For the next, we have been, so if you watch the previous episodes, we've been paralleling the Blackwater River. And so what you see here is basically, this is kind of an old dead arm, maybe not dead arm, but kind of this part here. I believe the grade is kind of built through what used to be kind of a little lake or a little arm here of the Blackwater River. So the Blackwater River kind of comes in from over there and then exits kind of over there. So it kind of comes in, and this embankment was kind of built right through part of this little lake that was formed by the river. So as I was saying, Canadian Northern built the line from Port Arthur to Winnipeg, and that was between 1899 and 1902. Oh, it's a nice breeze. You can see some ties here. And afterwards, they began building lines all across the prairies, and Canadian Northern actually gained sort of the reputation, or sort of the moniker of being kind of the railway line of the prairies. Again, you can see a little bit more of this kind of arm of the river here. And additionally, they also began building north from the city of Toronto, eventually reaching up into the Sudbury area, building some lines and acquiring some others. Here you can see this arm here a little bit better. Now, eventually Canadian Northern realized that for their company to continue long term, that they would need to have a transcontinental line. Now the problem was that Canadian Northern was very, very hesitant to build between the Sudbury area, specifically Rouel and Port Arthur, because the construction was going to be very difficult. They were going to have to build through terrain like this, the Canadian Shield, and therefore it was going to be very, very costly. And so they wanted to try to avoid that. And unfortunately, their hand was forced. They tried to get a running rights agreement with Canadian Pacific Railway, but that never came to fruition. And so they were forced to build. And again, the construction began in 1911 and was completed on New Year's Day, 1914. The last spike was driven. Here you can see a little bit of kind of deterioration of the grade. I don't think there's a culvert here. There's no marker here, and I don't see anything on a profile map that I have. It's kind of interesting that there's no culvert crossing through this embankment here. And so the line was completed in 1914, and it was opened for traffic in 1915. Now, unfortunately, the cost of construction of this section of line and some of the other ones caused a lot of problems for Canadian Northern. And I'm going to pull up a second here and interrupt myself. This is another section here, and we've seen some of these here where it looks like they've dug ballast, and it might have been right when they were building the railway, because that stump there looks like, so there were two pole lines running alongside the railway. So on the north side was the telegraph line, and we're going to be taking a look at a few telegraph poles. And on the south side there was a power line, and you can see kind of the remains of one of the power line poles there. So as I was saying, Canadian Northern started running into some big financial difficulties, partly due to construction costs and some of the implications of World War I. By 1917, the company was in some serious financial trouble and had to be taken over by the Canadian government. And by 1918, the company was forced to merge with a bunch of other bankrupt Canadian government owned rail lines called the Canadian Government Railways, and that merger formed Canadian National Railways. And so this line began operating under the Canadian National moniker, and the nationalization process was completed in 1923 with the absorption of the Grand Trunk lines. And so in 1923, the name of this line changed. It was originally known as the Nipigon subdivision, first of all of Canadian Northern and then Canadian National Railways. And then in 1923 became the Dorian subdivision of Canadian National Railways. And that name continued until 1960, when the Dorian subdivision, don't mind me here, I'm just taking you down the grade here while I finish my story. In 1960, the Dorian subdivision was merged with the more easterly Kinghorn subdivision, and the whole line became the Kinghorn. And it continued as the Kinghorn until 2005, when Canadian National decided to discontinue service on the line. And starting in 2008, they began pulling up the rails, and that process was complete by 2010. All right, so what we have here is we actually have, speaking of telegraph poles, we actually have a telegraph pole. It's kind of interesting how, you know, you go through some sections, you don't see any, and actually seen quite a number of them on this particular section. You can see it's kind of banged up. Nothing really too interesting to take a look at. There are some insulators on here, but mostly they're all kind of the boring ones, all the Dominion 42s. If there was anything quote unquote interesting, they would have been pulled off already, and you can see them here. I mostly do this because it is kind of a point of interest, and I do have one of my viewers that is very loyal in watching the videos, Mike, and he always wants to kind of see the telegraph poles. And so here's one with lots of insulators, but again, just kind of some of the less interesting ones. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to hop back up on the grade here, and we're just going to continue pushing our way west.